Welcome back to Cattle Call, an original production of the Rural Radio Network and the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Glad to have you with us again here this week. I'm Chad Moyer. Once again, Brad Kooima from Kooima Varilek in Sioux Center, Iowa, joins us for today's program. And thank you for joining us again here this week. And want to remind you that today's program is brought to you by Wolf Auto, Small Town Strong. Check out their website, listed right there, wolfauto.com. All right, Brad, let's get right into it. Just we got a few news stories to talk about here this week, and I'm gonna I'll pre-sell it just a little bit, and just wondering, picking your brain, if things are starting to turn around a little bit. But first of all, summarizing last week's trade, where everything ended up. What did you make of last week's trade?
Well, we finished up the week. Thanks for having me on, Chad. I enjoy this. We finished up the week kind of limping into the cash trade, right? The South was 3 to 4 lower, 237-ish. We were 230 on a few, some of them a little bit less than that. And frankly, had we done your program on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I'd have probably said, I don't know, steady at best. It feels like we got a few cattle sitting around and nobody seems to need very many. A lot of kill cuts. A lot of the Nebraska plants, for instance, didn't go on Friday. And just felt kind of but we've had some impressive futures action this week, and I think that's probably gonna, if you're a hedger, all of a sudden now you've got a futures market premium to cash. I think you're going to be kind of slow to take $4 less than where the futures are. I will take advantage of the luck of being on Wednesday instead of Monday. I think cash probably be a little bit firmer. But when you talk cash, Chad, I've got to talk about cash feeders because I think that's where the guts of this market is being driven here again this week. We had a little bit of you're talking about stories. We had that Screwworm story earlier, but also just the flat strength in this cash market, the strength that shows up in that feeder cattle index market. Hence the feeder cattle futures go plowing higher, and in fact made new contract highs today. So that's something. As high as we've been, we are now higher than we've been this whole roundup here on the feeder cattle. Very, very strong trade.
Okay. Well, since you, let's start there with the Screwworm story. Again, another case was announced for Mexico, right? But it was further away. The good news is it's not closer to the United States. But I guess, how is the trade? There isn't as much chatter. At least that's what I get. What do you think the trade's reaction is to that?
I think it's a good question. Yeah, it's 170 miles away instead of 70. The last one was, right? The MO is exactly the same as the last one. In other words, it came up on a load of cattle that was shipped from the deep south, where they have a high incidence of this. I mean, way down there in Mexican border stuff, right? The southern border. It slays me that these cattle move that easily, but that's a whole nother subject. And the market's reaction is getting a little bit muted. I think the traders getting like, oh, another one. It's like my partner said one time, the first mad cow was really bearish. The second one we didn't care about. You're getting to the point where, yeah, okay, got it. Another one. So what? But I do think it did reinforce some of the bullishness in the feeder cattle, because I think it was another, hey, well, then we're not going to open anytime soon. We'll just keep finding them. That's going to give them a little more confidence that the border was going to be later. The border reopening would be later rather than sooner. Which I think I'm in kind of a conundrum there. Science says that cold weather will stop it. We've got a couple products labeled safe now to Dectomax and Ivermectin to treat it. I'm kind of the view of, what are they waiting for? I think it's not 1966 anymore. I think science has improved quite a little since the last time we had it here, but that's just a dumb commodity broker making a statement. So.
All right. Well, since we're talking about that, we had a listener question, and we can kind of put this in now, somewhat related to this, not necessarily about the announcement, but just the fact of, well, okay, the border is still closed, right? There is no movement of cattle north into the United States to be fed out. So what's happening with all of the cattle that are in Mexico? How do you answer that?
It's a great question. A question I've asked myself, in fact, and actually scabbed into a kind of a resource for some of that, the answer to that question. We, long story, but I was part of an interview process for someone that was actually his job. He lived in El Paso, and he worked for a big company that imported Mexican cattle and placed them in U.S. feedlots. And so I asked him, I had an opportunity after the interview to ask him those questions. And I would preface it to say that the cattle industry in Mexico and Guatemala and et cetera is not nearly as transparent as it is in the United States of America. Okay, having said that, I think the answer largely is those cattle are there. They're on feed. They're either trying to get roughed along as much as possible if they're lighter, younger, where they're maybe ability to have them on pasture, but they're on feed, and particularly on two very, very huge feedlots, I'm told. Now, you can't be on feed forever. We're 11 months deep into this deal. Obviously, a lot of those cattle have already been slaughtered. So, as that meat finds its way back into the system somehow, you wonder where, I mentioned transparency, but you wonder where did that all end up exactly? I think to say that they've disappeared is not right. I think they're on feed. And I think if you look at the weekly exports of corn to Mexico, you could draw a pretty easy puzzle piece connection there that, geez, they're sure buying a lot of corn from us. Well, yeah, they probably need to buy more feed than they ever have had to before, because we're probably looking at 750,000 or so cattle that should have already been shipped to the United States that haven't been able to be. So it's I gotta think it's a logistic nightmare for some of those places down there. I wonder how they exactly are all getting them all dead on a timely basis, but it seems like that's what's happening. They're working through it, but it's got to be a terrific logjam for them too, Chad.
Yep. All right. Thanks appreciate the insight on that. Now let's go back to something else that you mentioned too, and just what the futures have been doing. And I was going to ask you again, I was going to ask you this a day or two ago, but with the fall that the futures had, does that create a basis play? I mean, should we be watching for deliveries, but then all of a sudden midweek we have a bunch of strength? So is there a basis play right now, or is that gone away already?
No, I think you're dead on target here, Chad. I'm looking at my screen here, 230, basically we're just almost 234 right now while we're doing this for October cattle. Well, the last bid I got last Friday was 230 in the north. Okay. So all of a sudden now, for the first time in over a year, you have futures above the northern cash. Now, it's not above the southern cash, but the futures react to the lowest common denominator. So there are delivery points here in the north too, obviously. And there's a delivery point practically in my backyard, the Worthing one. So the risk for the first time under delivery in many, many expiring contracts is that, I mean, if you can't get bid any more than 230, I always figure it's like a $2 to $2.50 a hundred extra cost for making a delivery. So now if your best bid is the futures, you're going to catch a few deliveries, which is the function of the market. But to go a little deeper analytically, I think is where you want to go with this a little bit, Chad, is does that now incentive the feeder to hold the cattle? Yes. Completely opposite of what we had all spring, all winter, all spring, all summer, where the futures are at a discount, warning you that, hey, I don't know how long this market's going to stay good. The futures are discounted. So let's sell, let's stay current. Let's really make sure that we do. And then compound that a little bit more now with the December cattle being another $5 or $6 higher than where October is. And that further, would a hedger think about, well, do I roll my hedges back and make these cattle bigger? Replacement cattle are awfully high to buy, feed's cheap, blah, blah, blah. So obviously that is not what the market's trading today. But I do worry a little bit. The basis flip and then the weak spreads are not a great indication, but how much bearish are you going to say when the feeder cattle are making new contract highs today and the back ones are $2 higher? I mean, the market's not caring about that today, but I guess stay tuned. I want to make sure that let's keep an eye on whether we're current or not. The average weights would indicate we're not real current at all, but let's stay dialed in with that.
All right, very good. So just thoughts on cash trade for this week. Just a few ahead in Iowa traded, I guess, 228, 230 or so. But all of a sudden, like you said, kind of some midweek optimism, it feels like, huh?
Like I said, I'd have said steady at best on Monday morning, but I'm going to flip here. I'm going to say, I would think that we'd stay within a couple dollars of futures. Let's go with 232 in the north, and maybe the south can get back to 238 or 39. It's a guess because everybody's pretty locked up, pretty tight here. The Packer, it doesn't seem like there's very many of them that want to try very hard, but it is only a Wednesday. We'll see. I would guess they'd sure try to be higher, though, with the strength in the futures that we've seen this week.
All right, very good. Again, contact information for folks that would like to reach out.
kkvtrading.com, but better call us 712-722-0023.
Always great to have those personal conversations. Brad, I appreciate the insight and the expertise. Thank you much. Again, that's Brad Kooima, and Varilek with today's cattle call. And again, be sure, if you have a question, put that in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button. It'll let you know that when the next cattle call comes out. And we do look forward to seeing you next week, once again, on Cattle Call. Brought to you by Wolf Auto, small town strong. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.